welcome everybody. Welcome to our spring 2025 cooking class. Uh, my name is Leah O'Connor. You guys can call me Lee. I'm a junior in the Hospitality Management Department at CSU, and I will be monitoring the chat today. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat below. Just a quick thank you to our Alumni Association members. We couldn't do this without you guys, so we really appreciate you guys. And I'll turn it over to Bailey. And just so you guys know, I put the link in the chat to the revised packet because there was just a few things wrong with the packet that was sent to you. So you guys can go ahead and click that and follow along with Bailey. So I'll turn it over to you.
Hi there, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining tonight. I'm so excited to cook with you. You get to see what it's like to be in my kitchen tonight, but I'm also excited to virtually be in yours. I don't know if I'm a new face to anyone. I can't see who all is on here. Maybe some of you have seen or met me before, but if not, I'm a registered dietitian at the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center, but I'm actually a culinary dietitian. I am a trained chef. So excited to bring that spin to all of the recipes tonight and not only talk about nutrition science, but also the culinary arts. If anybody would ever like to join me for an in-person cooking class, I do teach out of the CSU Spur Kitchen in Denver. So definitely, if you're interested, check out our website and see about joining me in person sometime. But for tonight, I hope everybody is excited to cook both a seasonal springtime menu, but a menu that is deeply rooted in gut health. I wanted to do a quick overview before we begin cooking. Not only what to expect from this session, but also what we're making and why. If we start with what this recipe packet is, we have an entree of kefir marinated chicken skewers with a microgreen chimichurri. We are doing a roasted artichoke side dish with a nice dressing and some toppings. It's very Mediterranean inspired. We are then also moving into a springtime farro salad with some bright flavors from lemon and mustard, but it is going to be chock full of crunchy green vegetables. And then we are rounding out this meal with the dessert of truffles, chocolate peppermint truffles, actually made of a base of figs. While hopefully this sounds delicious to you and also creative, the origin story of this menu is that it contains numerous ingredients correlated to improving our gut health. This is essentially rooted in prebiotics and probiotics. Under a big umbrella, we can just say, eat more plants. But then I want to give a brief analogy of diving into some quick nutrition education because this is really confusing and I'd rather address it now before we get into everything. When it comes to prebiotics and probiotics, we're thinking about gut seeds and gut fertilizers. So the seeds that plant good things in our gut and our microbiome are going to be fermented foods. So keep your eye out today where you see those appearing. The fertilizers, the miracle grow for our gut, are going to come from different fibers and plant-based foods. Some studies, or a very small study, has suggested eating up to 30 plants per week is what it takes to have a robust and healthy and protective gut microbiome. So as we're cooking, keep your eye out for that. And if somebody wants to count how many different plants you see appear today, put it in the chat and let us know. But that is the origin story of the why of this menu pack, or this menu and all these recipes. The final thing I wanted to cover before we get cooking is just a little bit about the flow. I may have the upper hand on some of you, depending how you prepared for this class, because I do have everything pre-measured and pre-portioned ahead of time to make this quite seamless. It might be different in your home kitchen, and that's okay. So before each recipe, I will introduce the recipe. We may bounce around and go a little bit out of order, but I will narrate that ahead of time. I will tell you about the recipe, the ingredients, and the how-to. I will move in and provide all relevant demos. I will recap the recipe before we move on, and then we'll keep moving through until we finish all 4 recipes. Some recipes are kind of 2 recipes in one, so bear with me. And the last thing is that we're not going to eat all together on a webinar, so we do have this full 2-hour slot devoted to just cooking. So we will see how that feels for everyone. If there are any immediate questions, please put them in the chat. I will aim to address the chat in breaks in action in cooking, or maybe even all at the end. If we need to, we'll move into more of a Q&A session. But otherwise, we're going to start cooking. So if everyone wants to check out that recipe package, the first thing we are going to make is dessert. Partially because I believe in dessert first, but partially just makes sense for the flow of class. So go ahead, folks, turn to that fig mint truffle recipe, review it quickly, and I'm going to jump into it. One practical reason we are starting with this recipe first is also what you see me handling right now, this food processor. If you have a food processor or a high-powered blender, that is going to be key for many of the recipes in class. I want to do dessert first in this so that it doesn't get any garlic taste or any savory taste to our dessert. So I'd rather get it in here, get it out, and move on. This fig mint truffle is a quick dump and blend recipe. Even though it's quite elegant, it comes together a little bit more quickly than you may expect. And it's really a simple ingredient list. So what we have are our figs. I would recommend, if you haven't done so already, you pull off that woody stem from the top. If you have a high enough powered processor or blender, it will blitz them, but they might remain a little bit crunchy. So pop off as many stems as you can. What we will then be adding is cocoa powder. This is unsweetened cocoa powder from the baking aisle. There's a pinch of salt. I have my peppermint extract, oops, my olive oil, and then a little bit of water. This recipe may seem a little strange, like, oh man, there's like a fruity, kind of plummy, jammy type flavor. Then there's the bitterness of olive oil. Then there's the refreshment of peppermint. Then there's kind of the bitterness of the cocoa. How does this all work? I promise you it does. But anybody who's super excited about this, hang off on taking a pinch of this batter immediately. The flavor tends to meld and get a little bit more mild the longer it sits in the fridge. So another reason I want to make this recipe first. The olive oil taste tends to show up as a little bit bitter at first, but it will calm down and blend into things. The reason we are adding some source of fat, being the olive oil here, is because we want this to have a rich, silky mouthfeel to be comparable to a traditional chocolate truffle. If we didn't add this, the mixture might just seem a bit crumbly and dry. So we're adding in something just a bit more luxurious. One swap I wanted to mention though, if you try this recipe and you're like, this is a little strong for me, use a neutral oil like avocado oil. You could maybe even make that switch now if you have it in your kitchen, or something like a melted coconut oil. That would be helpful because as coconut oil cools, it firms up and it'll help the truffles hold their shape. So just some ideas there and things to ideate on and to think about in your home kitchen. But for now, I'm going to start preparing this by just dumping and blending. So everything is going to go in except the amount of water called for. That is intentional because the number one best practice in cooking is maintaining the idea that you can always add in, but you cannot take out. I want to see how this mixture is coming together before I add liquid in, because in some cases, for reasons that get really food sciencey, maybe you don't need more liquid. Maybe your figs were pretty hydrated, and if you added more water, it would be runny or like pasty instead of something like a clay that you can form into little spheres. But maybe your figs are actually really dry and more dehydrated, so maybe you need more water. But we always just want to see what we can get without the water and then check. I'm going to now measure my peppermint extract. If we were working with vanilla, I would just eyeball it and dump it in. Because peppermint extract is so strong, I am taking care to portion this out. All right. So once my lid is on, oops, It is going to get a little bit loud. I am going to put this on the puree setting instead of the pulse setting. And then I'm just going to watch it as I go. And if I think it needs more water, I'm going to stream it in through my funnel. So simply put, if anybody saw me watching it and adding in my water, what I was looking for is this all to come together, kind of like a clay or Play-Doh. I could tell when it was still looking like maybe sand and not all coming together. And with each maybe teaspoon addition of water, I could start to see when it was sticking and forming almost like a ball towards the center of the food processor. So of course at this point, I will check. And I'll get a spoon and make sure I can scrape this all together. What you're looking for, folks, I think this could have a touch more water, but it's almost just right. This is a very forgiving recipe. As I'm holding it up to the camera, it should kind of look like a chocolate Play-Doh. Always get hands-on with your food and check it. What you can do right now is just make sure it all sticks together and you can form a little truffle out of it. If that is the case, we're good to go. So I'm going to put this back into a container, let it sit in the refrigerator so it cools down and all of these flavors meld, and then we will come back to this and finish the truffles later. As we are now getting a break in recipe one, now is an excellent time to pause and I can field any questions that may have come through the chat. I do not hear from the moderators or see any comments so far. I take it that means everybody is still blending or that was maybe crystal clear. In the interim, I apologize for walking away. I am just going to give my food processor a good rinse, and then we will return to begin our artichokes. So if anybody is cruising along or just wants to know what to expect next, go ahead and turn to the artichoke page of the recipe packet.
Hi, Bailey. I'm sorry, my mic wasn't working, but we do not have any comments so far.
No questions so far?
Nope.
Okay, wonderful. Well, in this brief pause while I rinse this out, let me know if anything comes in.
Will do.
Alrighty. For anyone at home, this is just going to get go right back in its place, and we're going to reset because we have at least 2 more recipes we'll be using this processor. I'm going to dry my hands and bring up the next group of ingredients. We are moving on to our artichokes, as they are the only recipe tonight that will require the oven, and they actually need to hang out in a 400-degree oven for about 40 minutes to become nice and tender. They also need that time because they are going to be filled with a garlic clove and covered in oil, and we want there to be enough time for the garlic clove to infuse that oil and have the oil run through all the layers and leaves of the artichoke and infuse it with a nice, actually decently mild but still noticeable garlic flavor. As I'm holding up these artichokes, you may see they are nature's microphone, something you can talk into. But other than that, they can be quite intimidating. I think many of us have had artichokes on some type of salad at a restaurant or maybe even on a veggie pizza. But when we look at this thing by itself, it's a little intimidating. It does take some chef skills and really repeated experience to get comfortable breaking these down. As a true story, I was given a C in artichokes in culinary school. It was one of our graded exams to actually learn how to break down an artichoke properly, and they are difficult. Restaurants don't always love them because a lot of the artichoke is inedible and has to be removed, so it can sometimes create this food waste, but if you have a compost, go ahead and utilize all the scraps for future yield in your garden. But if we're maintaining that garden analogy, while sometimes these take a learning curve to learn how to keep them in the kitchen, break them down, and work them into weekly meal prep, they are worth it for our guts. They are, of course, not the only food you have to eat for optimal gut health, but artichokes do contain a nice source of the prebiotic fiber, or that nice source of fertilizer that helps our own internal gut microbiome just flourish. I guess now's a good time to get into it a little bit. When our own gut microbiome is flourishing, that's not just good for our guts, it's good for our whole body. Studies show folks with improved gut health tend to have better immunity and get sick less. But what's really, really interesting is how our gut microbiome connects to our brain and actually promotes brain health. Having a robust and happy gut garden helps reduce inflammation in our brain and reduce the risk of chronic cognitive diseases like Alzheimer's or MS. And it may even be related to reducing depression and depression-like symptoms. So all of that coming back to the kitchen is the idea of diversifying our plant intake and maybe eating something like artichokes to continually nourish ourselves and our guts. So what's the how-to behind these? How do we get to a place where we're not so intimidated? I hope that after this brief demo, you maybe feel a little more confident. The edible part of the artichoke is the heart, which is the inner part of the artichoke, and really the inner part and the bottom part of this gnarly plant. So to get there, I want to start by peeling off some of these tough, inedible layers. You can feel them, though it does take time. You can start to feel when they're really waxy and might even poke you a little bit. So everybody be careful with your fingers. And then you'll start to notice when you can feel them get more soft and tender and almost like soft like a blade of grass. So I'm just going to use my hands at this point to strip off this tough outer layer. You may even see the artichoke gets lighter in color and maybe has some white or yellow at the bottom as you begin to peel these off. And once you do so, you'll have something that has more of this cone-like shape. At this point, I'm going to cut off the top 1/3. They are pretty tough. I have sharp knives, though I even struggled a little bit, so take your time. And then instead of having a really pointy surface, we now have a flat surface. I'm going to put these in the compost. And then I'm going to trim off my stem. Once again, compost. So now we're getting to the edible part. We're still not done. We're not roasting it like this yet. What I'm going to do is simply slice it in half down the middle. And now you'll have this nice cross section where you should be able to see some purple inside. If you look closely, you can look at mine or hopefully look at yours. And then you will start to see maybe what looks like a cotton ball in there or some soft, fluffy hair-like pieces. That is what's known as the choke part of the artichoke. That we want to use a spoon to gently remove. Some columns or articles or how-to about artichokes will call for using a knife to do this, a sharp paring knife. That can be helpful, but if it's really sharp, it's easy for that knife to get a little bit overzealous and carve out too much of the artichoke and the edible part. I believe that's what I did in culinary school and why I got a C in artichokes. I carved it up a lot and there wasn't much left to eat, so it was considered wasteful. So learning from that and being a little bit more delicate and just going in with this spoon and just scraping out those hair-like structures, kind of like you would scrape out the seeds of a pumpkin or a squash. So once those are out, you should have something that looks like this carved up artichoke. I will demo that one more time with the second half. I have another one here as well if anybody wants to see me do another go around of the whole thing. But what's really important to note right now is that artichokes brown when exposed to air, even quicker than a cut apple sometimes. So what we're going to do to counteract that is immediately squeeze a lemon wedge over it and rub the lemon wedge over the surface and all around the artichoke. This is going to add a pleasant flavor that we want, but it's also going to keep it from browning. The recipe calls to use a half teaspoon of lemon juice per artichoke, but a functional chef tip I have found is to just use your lemon wedge kind of like a kitchen rag or a washcloth, just to give it a once over and then put it down. I think that can be a little bit more easy than measuring everything out. When it comes to cutting and breaking down the artichoke, I want to see what questions there are. And I also want to see if that's making sense, if folks are feeling more confident with this, or if there's any still any sticking points. As I'm waiting for those to come in, what I want to mention when it comes to eating the artichoke, you are going to eat this bottom piece. It will become quite tender, almost, I hate to compare it to a root vegetable, but it's certainly not super vegetal. I find it has some body to it. So this bottom part in the middle is going to feel really tender. And then I just like to take my fork and pull out the leaves, and they will change texture and become quite soft. You can start to tell which ones are going to be tender and essentially chewable, and which outer pieces, if there's any remaining, aren't that tender. You can always choose to peel them off and simply eat them by kind of squeezing them between your teeth. And you can then determine and detect the tender part versus the rough edge and just discard the rough edge. But really the artichoke heart is this bottom tender piece. Just rubbing that with lemon juice.
And you're all set with questions, Bailey.
Okay, no questions coming in?
Nope.
Cool, wonderful. Well, folks, I can either quickly go through once more this second artichoke and repeat the process again, or I can move on to completing this recipe for now and getting it in the oven. Does anybody have strong preferences?
No one has said anything yet, so I think you're good to move on.
Okay, wonderful. I'll put this artichoke aside. I'm going to clear just a bit of my workstation. What we will do next, once those are coated with the lemon juice, I'm going to add my garlic cloves. I accidentally bought colossal garlic from the store instead of regular. So one garlic clove I've noticed is the size of almost like 2 or 3 small garlic cloves. So I'm just cutting mine in half and getting the peels off of them. Ooh, just flung some garlic. And then I am simply going to nestle this clove of garlic right into the basin or the pit of this artichoke and let my artichoke be a little boat that holds the garlic. I will go ahead and kind of fill these up and just clear my workstation really quickly. Okay. Next, I have a piece of foil for each artichoke piece. I'm going to take my artichoke boat with the garlic, and I'm just going to coat it with olive oil, and then season it with salt and pepper, and then close it up. If anybody was curious about this, the edits to the recipe, this was the recipe that unfortunately had a few typos in it the first time it was sent out, which I apologize for. I will say it doesn't note how much olive oil to drizzle onto each. That's because this was really just an eyeball. It's kind of going to change based off the size of the artichoke you have. Artichokes come in all shapes and sizes. Early spring, you might have teeny tiny ones, but of course you can get kind of some mega ones. So really, we just want to make sure the surface looks nice and shiny. And the salt and pepper. Okay. Now that these are all closed up in the foil, kind of like a baked potato, they are going to go in the oven and roast for about 40 minutes until they're tender. 40 minutes should just be just about perfect. Because they're in the foil, they are going to steam, so they're not at high risk of burning or becoming brown. Then you may notice on the very bottom of the foil where it touches the pan, it may have some nice heat transfer and get a little browned and caramelized, and that should only add to the nice balance of a sweet and savory flavor. So I'm going to go pop these in. And at this point, the remaining part of the recipe, which is making the dressing and topping the artichokes with the capers or the feta cheese and the shallot, that will all come later. I think at this point, I may do a knife skill demo of chopping the shallot just to get it ready, but that's really all of our dressing and our final touches that will go on a la minute, which means at the last minute before serving. Note with this recipe, if you're intrigued by it but don't know if you would quite do this as part of your meal prep routine or as a weeknight dinner, think about how you could make it your own. Once you're comfortable to breaking down and cleaning the artichoke, popping it in the oven and baking it like a baked potato might feel a little bit more accessible. The dressing component is just an option for those who really don't like dry food and like more sauces and flavor to make new vegetables intriguing. Use it. If you find that you like a simple artichoke steamed in that foil with some olive oil and garlic, that's a perfect side dish as is. If you're somebody who doesn't like the pungency of raw shallot or onions even, feel free to admit it. You don't need to do that. If you don't love feta cheese, you could do something like goat cheese if you find that to be a little bit less funky. So all of these recipes are just suggestions, and what is imperative from this session is that you just receive new ideas and learn how to make them your own and just grow in kitchen competence. For now, while we are here with the shallot, I was just getting some of the messy paper off. And at this point, though I did use my knife for the artichoke, I want to slow down now and really provide some education on safe knife skills. We're going to start with a clean and clear work surface, first and foremost, so you're not elbowing things or working too tight. You want to have a relaxed and nice ample amount of space. Next, with your dominant hand, you are going to hold your knife in a pinch grip. What that means is your thumb is coming around to pinch near the end of the blade where it meets the handle. Your 3 fingers are really wrapping around the handle, and your pointer finger is creating a pinch on the opposite side of the blade of your thumb. This is a very strong and stable knife holding hand. This creates even and predictable pressure on whatever you're cutting. What a lot of people do, I would say even pay attention in media and movies and Instagram. A lot of food influencers who are not chefs will put their pointer finger on top of the spine of the knife. This can create a really uneven pressure and even cause the knife to careen towards you. So this is a great habit to break if you can and get used to this pinch grip. And then our food holding hand or non-dominant hand is equally as important for safety as the knife holding hand. What you are doing here is pulling back your pinky and thumb to almost form this like tripod type base. They are going to stabilize and help your hand move back over the food. And then your first 3 fingers are going to curl down so that your fingertips are curled in and protected, but your knuckles run like railroad tracks, parallel up and down with the knife. This makes a really safe structure where it's a lot harder to cut yourself. Not impossible, but it's harder to cut yourself. What is most likely to be nicked when we're cooking is actually our thumbs and the tips of our thumbs. So if that feels really hard, what I would encourage at least everybody to do is pull your thumb back and get used to tucking that in. Now, to cut the shallot, you just saw me do a certain cut that happened pretty quick, but it was called our choo-choo motion or our rocking cut. A rocking cut means that at some point, one part of the knife is making constant contact with the cutting board. So we are not going up and down. That creates some risk. We are keeping this rocking motion with some sort of contact where the knife is rocking alongside or along the cutting board so that the heel of the knife comes down forcefully, and then we're repeating. You can go nice and slow before you cut anything and just get used to that gliding up and down motion, kind of like a rocking chair. Once you have that in place, it is time to start cutting. The recipe calls for sliced shallots. So we are going to do what's called a julienne, where I cut the root end off of the shallot with that rocking motion, and then peeling the paper off my shallot. And also look out for this really shiny membrane. It might be hard to see. It almost looks like a jellyfish. That is super slippery. So it's quite safe if you can remove that instead of letting your knife find it. It's sometimes helpful to even use a dry paper towel to rub across an onion or shallot, and it will help remove that. And then to julienne, this means long, thin strips. I am just going to put my shallot vertically on my cutting board and then run my knife up and down it vertically using my safe holding hand. So altogether, it should look something like this. And that's how I have my nice thin strips of shallot that I'm displaying across the cutting board. I will repeat on the other side. I always like to flip my onion or shallot towards the flat side that begins created, so it's a more stable item to hold. And now that these are chopped and ready to go later, I am just going to transfer them to a holding dish. If anybody doesn't want this much shallot and that much raw shallot feels overwhelming, once again, omit it, or take a section of those juliennes you created and work across them horizontally. That will create these nice even dices that are a little bit smaller and maybe a little more palatable that you can add on to your artichoke later. So a few different knife cuts to work with. I am using the spine of my knife to help pick up and transfer my shallots instead of the blade. That keeps my hand safe and also prevents my blade from dulling out. So I will put these aside, clear my workspace, and for now, all of our steps that we can consider for right now of the artichoke are done and currently accounted for. We will make the dressing a little later. But for anybody who's wondering what is next, we are going to create the marinade for our chicken and get our chicken prepped and dumped into that marinade before we cook it. So go ahead and review that recipe. But as I clean up and get everything ready for moving on, please let me know if there are any questions we can address up until this point. All right. I lost the chat screen on my laptop, so I'm just going to log back in. Okay. Doesn't seem like there's any questions. So I'm going to get all of my marinade pulled up and brought front and center. I do have to pop in my fridge to get the kefir out. Also the chicken. All right. Alrighty. I know at the beginning of class, I asked everybody to do a scan of the ingredients and see when you noticed maybe fermented foods that serve as the seeds of gut health, while also scanning for the fiber that serves as a fertilizer for gut health. It is at this point, when you hear about the kefir, you should be thinking about fermented foods and the seeds and the probiotics or the live and active cultures that may help colonize good microorganisms in our gut garden. If anybody is not familiar with kefir, it's not that different from an adult Danimals yogurt drink, except that in this intent and purpose, it is unflavored. It's similar to yogurt in that it's fermented milk, but this is a lot thinner. It's more of a drinkable versus spoonable. Kefir is known as the champagne of dairy because the fermentation process leaves some carbon dioxide in it that might feel a little bit bubbly when you drink it. So it's a little bit effervescent. I am using the kefir in this recipe to marinate the chicken in place of buttermilk, which may be common for tenderizing chicken, especially in the South. These acidic dairies can help break down or tenderize meat because of the acid. When the acid helps break down some of the protein, the meat is able to hold more water, and therefore it stays a little bit juicier. So we're starting with this acidified dairy, the kefir. And then I'm going to add 1/2 of a lemon and just squeeze that in. I just like to go right over my hands and catch any seeds. Of course, if you have any paper cuts, don't do this. Find another way, use a citrus juicer. But I find this to be quite simple for what I like to do. Next, I'm going to add in my olive oil and my spice mixture of paprika, cumin, and oregano. Might just get a spoon to help pour this in and stir it up. And then finally, I'm going to add my diced garlic cloves. And that will just help make it really aromatic and savory. So stir this together. So the lemon juice, just adding a little bit more acid that will help tenderize and flavor the chicken. Some of you may be wondering if the probiotic components of this marinade will still live because we are searing the chicken. The answer is actually no, they won't. So that may seem counterintuitive of defeating the purpose of having this probiotic. But why I wrote this recipe the way I did is because it's about getting used to maybe some unusual ingredients. I have yet so far to work with clients where everybody has kefir in the refrigerator, everybody knows what it is. What's most important in changing our gut health is creating a different pantry or a diverse pantry of many different ingredients and many different forms of ingredients. So maybe we get used to drinking the kefir in a smoothie or even as a snack with a piece of fruits, but we want it to become a staple in that it's super versatile. So it's always on hand, which means you're consuming it. So maybe if we get used to drinking it cold and uncooked, it might be helpful if we always have it, that we also learn how to cook with it, just so we're that much more incentivized to keep it in the fridge and keep working it in. And it's just an interesting pivot to using traditional buttermilk. So anyhow, last thing I'm going to do is use some knife skills again to break down my garlic. I am just popping it underneath the blade of the knife with the spine of the knife pointed towards me and using the heel of my hand with my fingers out of the way. If that scares you, but garlic hands don't scare you, feel free to rub the garlic as fast as you can between your hands and the paper will come off. And now at this point, I'm going to use that same rocking motion to begin to break my garlic down into thin strips. And then I can move them 90 degrees and then dice them into little squares or cubes. And then at this point, I'm going to clear my knife and then use a half moon shape and a bit of a rocking motion using the heel of my knife to just break the garlic down into a bit more of a paste. So it just takes a little patience here to keep giving this a once over and just going different directions to get this nice and broken down. The chunkier the garlic is, the more pungent it may be when you eat the chicken, but also the more likely it is for it to stick to the pan or the grill and burn and char a little bit. So I don't want to get this microscopic, but I do want my garlic just broken down into a bit of a paste. Alrighty. If you really want to get your garlic into a paste, what you can always do is take a pinch of salt, sprinkle it over the top of your cut garlic. I'll do a few more chops just to work that in. And this tends to be a trick folks really like in cooking classes. So I'm going to then hold my knife by the spine and use this forceful kind of pushing motion to pull my garlic back towards me. And this really helps get it broken down into even more of a smooth paste. What that looks like is it's smooth and liquidy enough to stick to my knife. And at this point, I'll just slide it in my marinade and stir it up. Garlic is wonderful for our gut health. If you have IBS and have been discussed with that with a doctor, maybe you find garlic doesn't work for you. But if we are speaking simply right now about feeding the gut microbiome and providing our bodies with wonderful sources of fiber that help fertilize things, garlic is in that prebiotic category. All right. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse, and then it will be time to dice up our chicken. For this, I am going to change knives and cutting boards. Alrighty, I hope everyone is doing well, cooking along at home. What I'm going to do quite quickly here is just cut my chicken into even-sized dices. I'm less worried about the exact size and most concerned about just all even pieces so they cook at the same rate and we don't have some pieces charred while other pieces are raw. I'm going to aim for about 1-inch dices, maybe a little bit bigger. I'll just start to cut these up and then drop them into my marinade. One of the myths of marinades is that longer is always better. That's actually not true because if meat is exposed to acidic ingredients for too long, they can tend to break down a little bit too much and maybe even be described as spongy, which doesn't quite sound appealing. Ideally, the recipe states to keep this for, I believe, 30 minutes to maybe 4 hours, maybe all the way up to 8 hours. But really, you just need, some chefs argue at least, you just need 15 to 20 minutes for your meat to just absorb some of the flavor and get coated with some aromatics and salt for it to be most pleasant. But I do think a couple hours tends to be enough time for some reactions to happen where the proteins change and just become able to hold a little bit more water. So if you need to make this on the fly, what we're doing tonight, many chefs would argue it's not bad altogether to only let this hang out for 20 or 30 minutes. I'm going to throw this away. Then I am going to just wipe down my station and wash my hands after handling the raw chicken. Alrighty. So once I coat all my chicken pieces and get them done for the marinade, I'm going to pop it back into the fridge until we're ready to skewer and grill. And then in the meantime, I have my little prep list. It is actually time to use this food processor again and move on to making all of our dressings and sauces and accompaniments so that we're going to work pretty streamlined, make these all at once, get them prepped and ready to go so that once they are all done, we're ready to get closer to eating and cooking our chicken. So our flow was designed purposefully so that we can do similar processes all at once, reuse the same materials and get them out of the way. So even though it feels like we're bouncing and pinballing all over the place, really this was done to help keep all materials in order and create enough time for roasting and marinating. So I will pop this in the fridge. And once again, now is a great time for any questions or comments.
I don't see any comments in the chat, but I'm here monitoring them. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them down below and I can either respond to them or ask Bailey.
Awesome, thank you so much. Next recipe is creating the chimichurri, the herby green sauce for our chicken skewers. If anybody is familiar with chimichurri, it comes from South America, specifically Argentina. It is commonly made using parsley, olive oil, red wine vinegar, and maybe red chili flakes. So we are making that today with the swap of using microgreens for the parsley, though you could certainly do both, but you could certainly also add any leafy green herb, and pretty much all of them would taste good with this. The microgreens are a rich source of many vitamins and minerals. They're also rich in plant pigments and antioxidants that further protect our gut health and can help calm down inflammation in our gut. So this is a wonderful display of just how to consume more microgreens. Commonly, they're put as garnishes on dishes on top of eggs or avocado toast, but we can also make this condiment out of them. So I think I need to pull all my ingredients up. But everything with the food processor tonight is really just a nice dump and blend recipe. Nothing too complex here. For the chimichurri, I'm adding in 2 ounces of microgreens. This is conveniently a 2-ounce package, so this is going right in. There are many different types of microgreens. This one is called Harvest Blend. I did rinse these ahead of time and put them back in the package if anybody is wondering. It is always best to give these a once over, a rinse under some water. Microgreens are different than sprouts. I accidentally bought both. I brought sprouts first. So microgreens can be sprouts. They are just a later stage of sprouts that start to get more of the leaves on them. They also tend to be a little less crunchy than the sprouts. I did make this recipe as testing with sprouts once, and it was just like a little bit more gritty than what I would expect from a chimichurri. Next, I am adding in my olive oil and my red wine vinegar. I just put them together. I have my 1/4 of a lemon that I'm just going to squeeze in. And then I have my clove of garlic. I am not going to dice this time. I'm going to let the food processor do the work for me. However, I am just going to smash it to get it slightly broken down and get it out of the paper. I will season this with a bit of salt. My fingers have lemon juice all over them, so just a touch of salt in here. And then a bit of black pepper. And then I am just going to blend this into a vibrant green sauce. It's not dissimilar to a pesto, if anybody is unfamiliar. Alrighty. Once this goes for a little bit, you can start to see it breaking down. I always like to scrape down the sides and just get some of the leafy greens pushed back towards the middle so they can start to break down. Make sure my blade is in place. A question I get at times is if it seems you need more liquid for these types of sauces, what do you add? I don't have any perfect answer. I'd rather give the education behind what to consider. If I add more acid as my liquid to thin things, that may create an imbalanced flavor profile that's too sour. So I generally halt from doing that unless you taste it and it seems a little flat. Sometimes I will add more oil, but I never want it to be too greasy. So the final option, if needed, if it's just staying pretty thick and chunky, is to add just a little bit of water. I don't want to dilute it, but if it just seems like it's not breaking down, maybe these greens are a little bit more fibrous and dry and not as hydrated, I will just add in a tablespoon or 2 of water. Alrighty. I have my chimichurri complete. I am just going to blend it a little bit more. If anybody can see, mine might look a little bit not bright green, and that's okay. Some of my microgreen mix did have some purple in there, so it slightly darkened the color, but it'll still taste delicious. I am at this point going to scrape out my chimichurri into my water jar that I'm now repurposing to be my sauce vessel. Mine's maybe a touch thin. I think it's okay to show that I made a mistake and maybe got overzealous with the water, so you can learn from my mistake. But you will see it's very, very similar to a pesto, though mine could certainly serve to just be a touch thicker. If I wanted to salvage this, what I could do is just use some type of leafy green. If you have any spinach or even arugula, that would help thicken it, or just add more microgreens. I'm going to put this to the side for service later as the condiment for the chicken. I'm going to rinse out my processor once more. And at this point, I'm going to return to the artichoke recipe to make that lemony dill vinaigrette that will go on top of them.
Before we do that, we did have a question from Chris saying what water, and just a request to slow down just a bit.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the question was about what water? Was that the...
Yes, that's all it says. I'm assuming it's for the sauce.
Yeah, sure. So you might have been cooking when I said this. The water is not listed in the recipe. I was talking about how to troubleshoot. So I walked through if your mixture seems a little dry and it's not coming together and you're blending it and you just don't know what to do. I mentioned that adding in more liquid in the form of acid, such as red wine vinegar or lemon juice, could make it too sour. So maybe that's not the liquid you go with. If you try to thin it using more oil, it may not be altogether unpleasant. So maybe you add a touch of oil, but if it still seems like it's not coming together, that's where I mentioned water, of just knowing how to work with your ingredients. Some microgreens may have more water content than others, so you need to pay attention by watching your recipe, how it's coming together, how fibrous it seems, how it's working, and know that you can troubleshoot by adding water. So to clarify, water was not in the recipe, it's simply a chef troubleshooting tip and a little bit of bonus education. So I am just going to rinse this out. If that seems confusing, I'll turn my water off. If that seems confusing, or if anybody's getting a little bit caught up or tripped up on anything along the way, please keep the questions coming and I'm happy to answer them. Alrighty, folks. Some of you may still be making your chimichurri. Some folks may be on other steps. Other folks may be wondering where to go. So to preface, the next step we are going to work on is making that lemon dill vinaigrette that will eventually top our roasted artichokes at the end of class. So go ahead and check out that recipe. There was a typo in this artichoke recipe that I mentioned before. It was the amount of oil called for in this vinaigrette. All the ingredients were listed on there. There was just slightly different ratios called for, or maybe a missing amount is what I was made aware of. So what we are going to need is 1/4 cup of olive oil and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. If you click on the package that was sent in the chat, you will see that there. Anybody who is willing to let me know in the chat. I certainly want to slow down, knowing that we have exactly an hour left to cook together and we are making wonderful progress. So could anybody mention how you are doing in terms of pace? If you want to take a bit of a pause here, a 5 to 10 minute pause where I can provide nutrition education and let everybody catch back up, or if now seems a good time to keep going. I cannot see everyone and I don't know exactly where you are. So please, if you have a free hand, type in the chat and let me know.
There hasn't been any comments in the chat yet, but I think you should just keep going.
Okay, wonderful.
Oh, Chris said repeat the typo, please.
Yes, so it will be, this is, if you need to see it, it is in the chat, in the updated link, but it is 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and 1/4 cup of olive oil. So double the amount of olive oil to lemon juice. And folks, I need to actually pause on this and make sure I am not going too fast, because for this vinaigrette, there's 2 ways we can go about it. One is we make it and we add our roasted garlic in at the end, but we can get the vinaigrette pre-formed. The other idea is that we're going to wait to make it all together once the garlic cloves come out. I do want to heavily rely on crowd feedback for this. I know that my artichokes probably got in a little bit quicker than some of you cooking at home. So maybe it makes sense to actually pause here, reroute and go to our farro salad and start making that dressing. And then we will make the artichoke dressing a la minute. I believe my artichokes are just about done. I believe I got those in really close to 6 o'clock, if not a few minutes before. But for the time being, maybe we just hang out, take a pivot. I steered everybody wrong and got us a touch ahead. Let's go to the farro salad. So I'm happy to take another pause here so everybody can switch gears, look to that recipe, look to those ingredients. And then I will narrate that because the farro salad is a 2-part recipe, we will start with the dressing component first, the Dijon dressing first. That will be listed in that recipe as we get the water boiling for the asparagus. So that is the overview of where we're going next. If anybody has questions, please let the chat know. Also, if anybody is wondering, I hope this came through clear. For the farro salad, it does call for cooked farro. That is what the recipe suggests, is that it is pre-cooked ahead of time. If anybody needs to go ahead and cook that, use about 1.5 cups of grain to about 4 cups of water. These whole grains need a little bit more hydration. The recipe called once again for cooked farro. If that is news to anyone, I would recommend cooking 1.5 cups of farro with 4 cups of water, as you would rice, using a similar process. In the meantime, however, I have all my dressing ingredients measured out. I know that that may be an advantage compared to any folks at home. So I also want to mention getting this water started so that we can quickly cook our asparagus. I have this measured out, but this is 3 cups of water. I am going to put it over medium-high heat and begin to bring it to a boil so that our asparagus can cook quickly. So I will get this started. Go ahead and do the same at home. And we just want this to hit a nice rolling boil. What you can also prepare in this time is a nice water bath. I have a large bowl of water here that I'm going to add ice to so we can get it really cold, so that once we cook our asparagus to the point of being bright green and tender, we can then drop it in here, let it cool down and remove it. That way we don't get soggy, gritty asparagus in our salad. So all great places to start is get your hot water ready and your cold water ready. I'm just getting some ice in there. If it melts, it's completely okay. All right. One more tool you could grab if you want is a colander to strain your asparagus, a slotted spoon. I have something here called a spider. I am just going to grab this and put it to the side so that I can use this to scoop and transfer my cooked asparagus into the ice water bath, and then transfer my cooled asparagus into my farro. I will bring all of my ingredients up front and center. If anybody is unfamiliar with farro, it is in the family of wheat. It kind of looks like wheat berries, but is a little bit different. It's very chewy and nutty. It has a little bit more heft to it, I find, than regular rice. And it's very rich in fiber and very satiating. So this is what the cooked farro should look like. Nice and plump, not dissimilar from wheat berries. Alrighty. There is an abundance of veggies that will go into this dish, so I'm bringing them up. And then first order of business is preparing the vinaigrette. This is a very Dijon heavy vinaigrette. So if you love that mustard and love that flavor, you should like the recipe. If you are not a big fan, now is a great time to modify. You can reduce the amount of mustard called for by 1/2. So that looks like 1 tablespoon of Dijon with a 1/2 teaspoon. That will pare it down and give you a less tangy, mustardy vinaigrette, but the olive oil and lemon juice will still hold together, and it still will be a very classic dressing. The recipe calls to make this dressing in the food processor. So if you would like to do that, go ahead and follow the steps to do so. I am just going to demonstrate how to make vinaigrettes without a food processor for anybody who's curious about how to make them by hand the traditional way, and also demonstrate this in case anybody is curious about making dressing, but maybe you don't want to pull all this equipment out. I do think using equipment to make dressing is helpful. It can be really fast. It can also help keep dressing combined without separating out for longer amounts of time due to its high-speed nature. But I think it's a great culinary skill to have, to know how to whisk these up by hand. The rule of dressings and vinaigrettes is that we always whisk together all ingredients, leaving the oil out. So we whisk together all of the ingredients except the oil, and then we are going to add in the oil drop by drop and then into a thin stream. The one thing I have that's not already added into my bowl is my garlic. So I want to break that down right now and then add it into my bowl of the Dijon vinegar, the lemon juice, and the sugar. Then I did go ahead and add salt and pepper to this. But I am just going to mince my garlic once more. So if you missed that demo earlier, I am going to provide that now. So I'm simply breaking the garlic down into strips and then flipping them and dicing them into little squares or cubes. And then I'm doing a rocking motion to continue to break them down a bit more of a powerful manner. And then once ready, I am going to add a pinch of salt to be a little bit abrasive and help pull out moisture and break this down into a smoother garlic paste. Once I have that nice garlic paste, I am going to add it to all of my liquid ingredients. Once again, the mantra is accept the oil, and then I can thoroughly whisk them together. So what I have now is a mixture that almost looks like honey mustard, and I want to demo what it looks like to slowly add the oil. Just gonna check on my water. I see little baby bubbles starting to come to the surface. I'm just turning the heat up. But I'm going to take my oil in my measuring cup, and the drop by drop requires a bit of a steady hand. My dominant hand I'm going to use to keep whisking. And then my non-dominant hand, I'm holding the oil to add drop by drop. If you feel like you need to switch hands to be more stable, do so. I generally add the oil drop by drop for about 20 drops. 20 small drops, that is. This helps the oil separate and get incorporated into the liquid mixture instead of globbing together. If the oil globs together quite quickly, that's when you get the instant separation of layers. However, this vinaigrette is quite forgiving because Dijon mustard has a chemical component, or a food science component, I should say, not necessarily chemical, that will help oil and water stay combined, and unlike ingredients, stay combined. So this is quite forgiving, but still nonetheless helpful to practice. And after adding in all my drops, this is when I'm using that steady hand to add the oil in a thin stream. So I'm just continuously whisking. I am not doing this now, but a trick some chefs swear by is putting your bowl on top of a wet towel. That will help prevent it from running all over the place, so you're not chasing your bowl as you're trying to be very methodical. You can see this is a low and slow process, but I'm almost done. And with that, all of the oil has been added. And I have a nice creamy vinaigrette to dress the farro salad with as all the vegetables are added. As I am looking at the time, for me personally, it is time to grab the artichokes out of the oven and check their tenderness. So I'm going to break and do so. Know that I am not telling all of you to do the same. If yours went in later, refer to your own time or your own timer, or your own clock or your own timer that you're going by. But in the interim, instead of jumping right to asparagus, I am going to check those artichokes. Now is also a great time for more questions or comments.
No questions.
All right, wonderful. So at this point, folks, a little break in the action. I'm going to put all of my garlic in a little vessel to the side so I can finally add it to the artichoke vinaigrette when I'm ready. But I am going to hold up as much as I can stand it because it is quite warm, this steamed artichoke. I want to see what the camera shows, but sometimes you can tell it shrinks in size a little bit. Whoops, my leaf fall off. It's a little bit more browned in some areas. You can start to really feel the leaves on there, on this bottom piece, that are going to be a little less tender and still a little bit woody. And then I can start to feel really the tender pieces that are going to just peel out with a fork. So that is what you're looking for and how you're going to end up eating this. So I hope this does clarify any questions. And with that, I want to spare all of that good garlicky flavor. Actually fell up over there. All right, so I'm going to put these to the side. Go ahead and keep an eye on all of your artichokes. And then moderators, I had a question for you. My screen is saying I'm backstage and only the host can see me. Can all the participants still see me?
I can see you. If anyone can drop down in the chat if they can also see, that would be appreciated. Nothing on my end says that you can't.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, Chris said that they can see you.
Okay, awesome. All right, undue panic there. All right, so I'm just taking out my garlic cloves. I'm keeping my artichokes wrapped in the foil just so they stay warm for service. Okay. I have a jar ready for my garlic. Okay. And folks, at this point, I hope everybody is mostly done with making that mustard-based vinaigrette and maybe even close to putting that off to the side to toss the farro salad with later with all the crunchy vegetables. At this point, ideally everybody's water on the stove is also boiling and the ice bath has been prepared. So we can go ahead and prep our asparagus for that quick plunge. Alrighty. I've got my asparagus lined up. I have not broken this down ahead of time. How I like to treat asparagus is cutting off just the bottom portion of those woody stalks that would be quite fibrous to eat and not necessarily palatable. Feel up the stem of the asparagus. If you're not sure how to do that, you can tell where it stays quite bendy. It's the most bendy maybe at the top. And then as you get to the bottom, you can feel where it be quite rigid. Many chefs recommend there's a natural snapping point as you get to maybe the bottom quarter of the asparagus. You can feel where it would naturally break and get rid of some of these woody stems. And once again, just compost them. And once you have done so, I like to hold the asparagus just in a bundle, and every about 2 inches up, just create a cut. I like to leave the asparagus spears just a touch longer. I think they're quite elegant and pretty to serve that way. But really, it's up to you at the end of the day. The way you cut it isn't super important, just getting that woody piece out, then it's all going to be edible. I'll take a little pause for everybody, or just so everybody is caught up and ready to put their asparagus in the hot plunge and let it cook. This cook period is going to be quite quick, really just about a minute. The visual cues that you're looking for is the asparagus may become a more vibrant green color, a more bright green. That's typically the indication there's a reaction happening, taking some of the oxygen out that allows it to appear that way. At that point, we know it's going to be crisp tender, which means it still has bite to it. It's essentially al dente. It's not going to taste raw, but it's also not going to be puree soft. So if everybody is ready with me, I'm going to go ahead and plunge these into my boiling water for just about a minute. If your asparagus is really cold and right out of the fridge, it may bring your water temperature down and take a little bit over for a minute for it to cook if the boiling immediately ceases and it doesn't recover into a rolling boil. If that's the case, take your time, just keep watch of it. The best method for checking your food is always just taste test. So use that slotted spoon or spider or a fork to just grab a piece out, let it cool, blow on it, and then chew it. And when it gets to the desired tenderness that you would like, that's when you know how to pull it. So this is also a highly personalized process of what you prefer. My boil is just now starting to recover. My asparagus was a bit cold, so I might go for about a minute from now, just a few seconds delayed. I don't want to move in to chopping up more vegetables just yet and moving at warp speed. We will just stay on the task of letting the asparagus boil, then transfer it to the ice bath. But if anybody wants to lay some produce out on the cutting board, maybe next one to go to will be the fennel bulb, and just get that laid out on your board and ready to go. I'm just going to go for a few seconds. Then I'm going to transfer the cooked asparagus into the ice bath. It can sit there for another minute or two. Not a big deal if it sits down in there longer and cools. Once it has cooled down though, I am going to transfer it to the bowl with the cooked farro. At this point, I'm ready to start my transfer. So I'm just scooping them up, shaking them off, and plunging them in. I will hold this up to the camera so everybody can see it. But see what I'm talking about with the vibrant hue. Hopefully you're noticing this at home as well. At this point, I'm going to take my pot of water off, transfer it to the side. What we are looking at here is this bright green, lightly cooked asparagus. So I'm just going to let this cool down. You can even feel with your hands how much easier it is to grab it. And it may just feel lightly warm to even room temperature. It doesn't have to feel ice cold. We're just halting that cooking process. So now I'm just going to take it, shake off the excess water so we don't get a soggy salad, and just transfer it right in on top of my farro. All right. So with that, we are all done with the asparagus, and it is time to move on to our fennel bulb. Fennel has a nice sweet flavor. It can be described as a bit licoricey. In many recipes, it can be used with celery or even to replace celery. That would be common in some Italian cuisine. But fennel tends to just be a somewhat unfamiliar ingredient to some kitchens and just a little bit underutilized. But it really has this refreshing taste and a nice snappy texture that is delightful eaten raw in salads, though it's also delightful when it's cooked. Something I'm going to do for today's recipe is just trim the bulb so that we just have this bottom round remaining. Whoops. It's a little bit tougher than I expected. And I'm also going to trim this root side off. The bulb is a little bit more tender than the stalks. They look so much like celery, but taste very different. The tops can be used in different stocks. If you ever want to make a veggie stock, the fronds can be added to pestos or different vinaigrettes as well for a nice licoricey taste. If you want, you can these are edible. You could certainly chop these, the stalks up and add them to the salad if you don't want to use them. But really we like to use the bulb just because it's a little bit more tender and has a little bit more snap to it. Now that I have it trimmed up, I'm just going to cut it in half. I can cut that half in half to do quarters that lay a little bit flat. And then it's up to you what type of shape you want to cut. For now, I would like to do a julienne, which is just those long, thin strips. But for everyone at home, think what you would like to be on your bite of a fork or in the spoon. What shape makes sense? Know that you can take those long, thin strips, the juliennes, move them 90 degrees, and cut them into those little even squares as well. So once again, those knife skills of the rocking motion, going slowly up and down to create those thin strips, always letting the produce lay on its flat side to keep you safe so it's not rolling around and you have a safe surface. If you find the flavor of fennel to be overwhelming, you can choose not to add the whole bulb, or you can choose to cut it into those smaller pieces. So once again, those little dices, if I take all of these juliennes and just run my knife over them the opposite way, you may find that smaller size becomes a little bit palatable and not as overwhelming for you to bite into. So truly, the type of cut is up to you. This recipe is just a guide. Going to add that in. I'll add just an absolute array of fennel to my farro salad. So I've got some dices, I've got some juliennes. I'll just keep going here. All right. I had a relatively large bulb of fennel compared to some that I've seen at the store. I like fennel, but not an overwhelming amount. So I may take a pause on how much I add and cap it for now. But I am going to set this aside for me to use later. Next up, if everybody is okay that I move on, I have my 2 stalks of celery. This will just add a nice, crunchy, refreshing flavor that will also help accent the fennel and make it maybe even seem a bit more familiar. I have washed my celery, but I am just going to cut the root end off. For celery stalks, something I like to do is use my knife and the tip of it, almost like a pencil, to just trace up and cut my celery stalk in half into a more bite-sized piece. So I will repeat that on both ends. And then I will just stack these all together in a bundle and just start to work my knife down the horizontal length of them, and we'll add it right in. So if this is going too fast, let everyone know in the chat, but really now is just the time of breaking down vegetables and making this nice green salad. If anybody is still working on the fennel and celery, I will let you get caught up to speed. I just want to note that the final things we're adding to the salad are the leafy greens. So when I say leafy greens, I'm referring to the arugula, but also the herbs. There are 5 stalks or 5 little green onions that I'll add. I have some bunches with multiple strands hanging out, so I'm just going to do about 2. This is highly dependent upon your love of green onions, and if you want them in here, if you don't. The other herb I have ready is that parsley once again. So if everybody is okay with it, I am going to move on to chopping these green onions or scallions. With any leafy green herb, what I like to do is just hold it together in a bundle so that my hands and my fingers aren't hidden under any part of the herb. I will then use my claw hand to hold it. And with scallions, I am going to really cut from root to tip or from tip to root and use all of it, the white part, the light green part, and the leafy green part. I get questions about that a lot. All are edible. Sometimes you see the white part is what may get sauteed in cooking for soups, more generally speaking, and maybe the leafy part is used for garnishes, but all of it has a similar flavor, so it's all just going to get added in. So as I have my bundle, I'm just going to work down the length of it, going as low and slow as I need to keep my fingers safe. Just walking my fingers back. As I go until I hit the root end. And just right into the salad bowl. I'll take a pause for everyone to get through those, and then I'm just going to get my parsley ready. This is a big salad for anybody who's maybe adding to your bowl. You might be seeing it get pretty tall, get pretty high. I know mine is, but it's going to be very refreshing and very tasty when we do get to it. Okay. Finally, for my parsley, this is very similar to the green onions where I want to make a bundle of it. I like to note with leafy green herbs like scallions, with parsley, like basil or like mint or cilantro, the stems have flavor and aren't a waste product. They might be a little bit crunchier, but they're going to impart the same flavor. So I always just use the stems included in my recipes, unless for any reason I really don't want it to have any extra crunch. But I find that's very resourceful and ends up with less food waste to do that. So if you don't want the stems in there, pick the leaves off your parsley, that's fine. But what I generally like to do is just take a bundle, stems and all. I will actually roll it up to create an even tighter bundle, and then we'll run my knife across it to break it down. When I do that, once again, I will shift it 90 degrees and break it down in the opposite direction. This is the preferred way of cutting herbs so that they maintain their vibrant green hue. Sometimes with dull knives, the more we crush herbs, the more they can take on an olive green hue that's not as vibrant. But if these are still a little bit too big and chunky for you, go ahead and run your knife over it in that arc motion, that semicircle. At this point, I have some nice parsley confetti. So really, we are about at the end of this spring farro salad. We have all the components ready to go. I'm going to toss this together now. I do have my arugula and my dressing to the side. Based off the capacity of my bowl, I am just going to add in some of that and a handful of that arugula called for. And start to mix this all together. And get all the veggies evenly dispersed so you just don't get a bite of one thing. I do want this to be a nice tossed salad. So I'm just going to continue to fold it all together. And then I can start to dress it. If you are somebody who prefers your salads really, really crunchy and not at all soggy, go ahead and only dress it a la minute right before you serve it, or a drizzle on your own plate. But if you would like this to be a more dressed and bound salad, something that's cohesive and everything is evenly coated, go ahead and add your dressing now. That is what I'm going to do. And I'll just continue to toss it together. Scraping all of that in. Alrighty. I just want everything to get evenly coated. I also don't want any pockets of dressing that could all ooze out at once. Rather, I want that really intense mustardy flavor to get evenly distributed. Alrighty. So hopefully you're at a point of combining yours all together. It should be looking like the picture on that recipe, a beautiful, vibrant green salad. So I can hold mine up to you all and show you what mine looks like. And I hope that everybody cooking at home, that yours is very, very close to this. We are making excellent progress through class. As you all are finishing up the salad, I just want to catch everyone up to speed. I would go ahead and check on your artichokes now if you haven't and pull them out. They're probably done. So if we've got the artichokes roasted, that recipe is on its way to being done. We just have to take that garlic and make the vinaigrette. We have our second side dish of the farro salad done and out of the way. We have our chicken marinating and we just need a skewer and grill that off. And the last thing we have is our truffles. The truffle itself, the batter or the dough, so to speak, has been formed. We're just waiting to form those into balls and drizzle them with a little melted chocolate, and then dessert will be ready. What I am going to do is get some excess ingredients out of the way, clear my space, bring my little camp stove front and center so we can begin to grill the chicken, and then we're going to start to round home for today's class. Hope that sounds okay to everyone. And once again, here's a call for questions. I have plenty of time now to answer anything. So let me know how you're doing and where you're at. I'm going to get my stove heated to about a medium high on my flame. I wouldn't recommend doing a high heat because it will get smoky. I actually prefer to go closer to a medium if you have a numeric electric stove. I think a 6 would be great. Alrighty. Any questions before we get ready to start skewering and grilling our chicken, or sauteing, searing our chicken? Okay. If not, what I'm doing now is just getting some neutral oil, some avocado oil, onto the bottom of my skillet. I want to let that heat up. Might even turn my heat to low just so it doesn't smoke, though it does have a high smoke point. And I want to let that heat up as I begin to skewer my chicken. I may grab a plate just to hold my chicken skewers so that I can get maybe two going in to the pan at once. What I have done is soaked my skewers ahead of time so they don't burn or char. If you did not do that, a-okay. We are not working with an open flame, so it's less likely. This is just a practice I like to do, but I want to emphasize it's a lot less likely that these catch on fire in a pan without an open flame to attack them and combust them. I also slightly trimmed my skewers with just kitchen scissors so that they will lay in my pan nicely. Everybody may have different sized pans at home, so you may not need to do that. That is just something I did ahead of time. If you didn't do it, do so now, where it's a tip towards for next time. Also, if you don't have skewers or find them to be a little bit cumbersome, you can just throw the chicken in. You can use a slotted spoon to put it in the pan without crowding it and kind of stir fry it, and that will absolutely work. What I'm going to do is just begin to thread a few pieces of chicken, probably about 4 to 6 pieces onto each skewer, and then I will lay it on my plate, and then I will cook 2 at a time. If you are doing full length skewers, you may find you get about 4, maybe 4 to 6, depending on the size of the chicken you cut up. Because I cut mine down to about 3/4 their size, I might get a little bit more. So I'm just threading these on. I do have 2 ready to go. I might just go ahead and make 4 and see where that gets me. And then we will start the cooking process. I will, of course, demonstrate how to cook these and get my first 2 cooked off, depending on how many skewers you have. If you need to continue the cooking process after the webinar ends, go ahead and do so. But we shouldn't be too far behind. I do want to preface to everyone, I do have a highly sensitive smoke detector. I am quite worried that any amount of smoke will make that go off. I deeply hope that does not happen in today's session, but it could. So fingers crossed. Maybe some folks want to see chaos and you would love if that happens. Maybe some folks of you are hoping that does not happen. I'm hoping it does not happen. I'm going to rinse and wash my hands really quick. Then I will begin sauteing my chicken. Alrighty. I'm gonna bring my heat back up for my open flame, what I can discern to be the low end of medium high, the high end of medium, about a 6. I'll make sure my oil is shimmering. We should hear a good sizzle when we add our skewers. We don't want to overcrowd the pan because that will inhibit browning and will cool down the pan so the chicken doesn't cook as efficiently. And then when I add them, to get a good sear and browning, I want to let it sit undisturbed on one side for 2 to 3 minutes before I flip it. So there's a nice sizzle. Because these are smaller, I think I can get away with adding 3 skewers. While this cooks, maybe you all are also getting yours in the pan or are very close to it. I'm going to continue to thread the rest of my chicken on the skewers. I should just have 1 or 2 more. I'm going to let this cook for about 2 to 3 minutes per side. And then if we need to, we will move on to making that final vinaigrette for our artichokes if time allows, or if we need to wait for a different stopping point, we will certainly do so. But as we're cooking this chicken, let me know if any questions are coming in. What I want to offer right now is that if you also want to get a food thermometer handy, This is going to be essential for knowing that your chicken is safe. The safe internal temperature for consumption of chicken is 165 degrees. We don't want to go way over that, where it may get a little rubbery and dry, but we certainly don't want to go under. A lot of recommendations are to cook chicken to 160, 155, or even 160, and let the carryover heat bring it up to 165. In the interest of food safety, I always want to see the thermometer at least register 165 so that I know that nobody is getting sick. All right, so that ends my skewering process. I got about 6 on here. I'm probably about close to a minute into cooking on one side. I may need to talk louder over the sizzle. I'm not sure if you all can hear that. One way to know without flipping the chicken that it is achieving a sear is that when I see the edges of the chicken start to turn white and the top of the chicken turns from a bit of a pinkish color to more of an opaque white. So I'm also looking at that as my indicator to flip. And then my indicator when the chicken is done is, of course, the reliable food thermometer. I'm going to rinse my hands and get my marinating bowl out of the way, and then I will reconvene with you all momentarily. In this moment, I think I am going to go ahead and place my artichokes onto a plate for service as we begin to round tilt and get everything ready. Alrighty. And it's at this point that I would like to go ahead and flip my initial batch of skewers. I expect to see some nice golden brown or even brown colors on the pan side. If you are a few minutes behind me, I hope that you will also see these lovely results. I want to be careful that I don't fling chicken everywhere, but I would like to hold this up to the camera so you can start to see what my skewers look like. You might see some smoke and sizzling. Hopefully that didn't mask the camera too much to the point of not being able to see what happens or what is going on. I want to allow this to continue to cook for a few minutes, and then I will take the temperature. For the intent and purpose of staying on time for class, I would like to put my chicken to the side, and I will cook it after class ends. You all can do the same. And once this chicken is done, I do want to shift back to getting that artichoke vinaigrette recipe ready. So that lemon dill vinaigrette. If anyone notices too aggressive of a smoking or burning and blackening, turn the heat down. I know that sounds overly simplistic, but sometimes we go by the recipe so much. Electric stoves are notoriously inconsistent and can actually get too hot for too long and are hard to cool down. So you can even temporarily remove the pan off heat, let it cool down. Once again, I don't want to confuse anyone because I am not doing this, but if you notice extreme smoking and scorching in your pan, where it might make the chicken bitter or acrid, use a little bit of water. Use a tablespoon of water to splash it in, cool everything down, and get any bits off the surface of the pan that could continue to smoke and burn. And that is just one culinary hack to try. As this is cooking, I do want to remove one of my skewers gently and just test the temperature on this to see how close I am getting to 165. I might remove mine from the pan just to get an accurate reading. With these food thermometers, we just want to make sure that the probe area, the end of the food thermometer, is fully submerged into the chicken and is not poking out into the open air where you may get a false reading. Where I took it out of the pan as if I poke it through the chicken and touch it to the bottom of the pan that's very hot, I could also get a false reading. I am right at about 155 degrees, so I just have a few more minutes left in the pan. So I will return this and pop it back in. And I hope that at this point, everybody has at least flipped their skewers and is on their way to cooking their first batch. While I am letting these hang out, I would like to return to finally finishing off our last vinaigrette, our last topping for the artichokes. So what we can do here, similar to the principle of that Dijon mustard vinaigrette, I want to add everything but the oil to my food processor. So this is a way to just make a slightly quicker vinaigrette. So you see it demonstrated using two methods. I will go ahead and add those roasted garlic cloves. One more in there. I'm going to add my lemon juice and just a bit of honey that it's called for and scrape that in. And then I want to add the dill. The dill is also a leafy green that has a tender stem. Some parts of dill can be a little bit woody, but generally it's pretty tender. So I like to just take the dill, rip it off, get some of the stem pieces without any fronds away, and then I'll just add that right in. So I have about a half cup. Right. I am going to secure my lid on the processor and get this blending into a bit of a green puree. And then I am slowly going to stream the olive oil through the funnel. And I will complete this dressing right as my chicken is coming to its completion. I will scrape down that dressing and check on it in just a moment, but for now I just want to get a check on this chicken. I have a really nice sear happening. That's going to be very tasty. So I can confidently say my skewers are now holding at 165 degrees. So I'm going to take them off heat. If you are still cooking, let your chicken go, tune in as you're able to, and I'm ready to get us to a nice stopping point of completing our artichokes, plating up the chicken, and then finally melting the chocolate to top our truffles. So I'm going to start to put all this to the side.
We did have a question asking how much oil.
Sure, you had a question come through about what?
How much oil?
Yes, that was a quarter cup.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. I do just want to scrape down the sides and make sure all is coming together. I'm just going to blend this, and it's going to be a bit of a chunky vinaigrette with the dill, but I want it to be as smooth as possible. Sometimes I will say troubleshooting, the less full the food processors are, the harder it is for them to pull all ingredients down and really get blending, so it can take a little bit of time. I'm gonna go one more pass and get it as close as I can to what the final product should look like. If you're using a blender, you might actually notice better results because they tend to be more narrow and pull everything down a little bit easier when we're working with smaller amounts of liquid. Alrighty, you will be good to go. So I am simply going to spoon out some of this lemon dill roasted garlic vinaigrette and put it over my artichokes just to dress them and add another punch of flavor. This may be a little bit hidden behind my stove. I'll get that out of the way. Push this to the side. And then to finish off the meal, or this dish, I'm going to top the artichokes with some of the crumbled feta. Add capers if you like, just for another briny element. That is how the recipe developed for my personal taste. I have the capers. I may go light on them. I will add capers to one. And then do one without and just sprinkle those on. So that is our fully dressed and complete artichoke side dish. I should lay these all out in the best display that I can. Seeing what is in the way and giving your view. Next up, we have our tossed spring farro salad with that nice Dijon vinaigrette. We have our grilled chicken skewers with that microgreen chimichurri sauce that we can put on the side or even drizzle right over the top of our grilled chicken for a bright, even spicy flavor from the garlic. And then last but not least, I know we're right at 7:30, but we do have those truffles to finalize. So I am going to pop my chocolate chips in the microwave those in 30-second intervals until I get some nice melted chocolate. And I'm going to pull that truffle batter right out of the fridge and ball those up in these final few minutes. For everyone at home, I hope all of your dishes, both the entree, the chicken, and the sides are starting to come together, and just know you're only a few minutes away from eating. My chocolate has been sitting on the stove with the oven that's been on. So they are a little bit soft and semi-melted. I'm hopeful that after one go round in the microwave, they will be ready to go. At this point, if you're ready, go ahead and get your chocolate chips in the microwave if possible. But once again, this dessert, if you're feeling a little rushed, the dessert is going to hold well for a couple days. It can always come later. You can finish this off after your meal or even tomorrow if needed. But these truffles, the hardest part is done. They will come together quite quickly. My dark chocolate chips are sufficiently melted and nice and glossy. I'm just going to stir them together to ensure no large chocolate chunks. So that might be a pleasant surprise if you were to get that in your truffle. And at this point, we're ready to ball up these truffles. I like to take about a tablespoon-sized scoop and start to clump it together and then form it into a ball. If it's been chilling and for any reason feels like it's set up or got a little congealed, the heat from your hands will help bring it together and bring it back into that nice Play-Doh clay type consistency and have it hold. These truffles tend to have a very strong flavor with the mint. So the smaller we roll them, the more delicate the flavor will come across. If they are quite large, it may be a bunch of flavor at once. So I am going to do just about 3 of these. And then it is up to you how you would like to get them coated in chocolate. If you would like, you can use the method of 2 spoons and put them directly into the melted chocolate. Get this stove out of the way. And then use the 2 spoons to gently coat them, mix them around, and then you have your nice chocolate truffle that you can scrape onto your plate or a piece of parchment paper to hold. This will set up relatively quickly at room temperature, but very quickly in the refrigerator or freezer. If you would like, you could do a simple drizzle on top or even use a fork to achieve that, but just go side to side in alternating motions. Or if you'd like, you could frost it almost like a cupcake, putting a dab of frosting on top and then using the back of your spoon to move it around and frost the top, which can also give a quite nice delicate design. If you wanted more of a color contrast in the future, if you like this recipe, you could always do white chocolate chips to accent it and create a more dramatic appearance. But that is what those figment truffles will look like at the end. That does bring us to the conclusion of today's class. I know it has been quite action-packed, and we have gotten through an abundance of recipes full of plants, full of fiber, and full of nutrients that protect your total health, but specifically with gut health. I hope that everybody learned a little bit today, whether about culinary technique or troubleshooting, or whether about how certain nutrients interact with our bodies. I hope that everybody maybe found one new ingredient that you may feel comfortable weaving in more consistently into your meal prep routine. And I thank you so much for joining tonight. Oh, it looks like questions may be coming. So I know everybody at home may still be catching up with the final touches of some of your recipes, but I am happy to stay on for the next few minutes and answer any questions.
Perfect. I just want to give a big thank you to you, Bailey. Thank you for doing this class for us. And if you guys have any extra questions, feel free to drop them in the chat below. I'll be around for just a couple more minutes, and then you guys can all eat your delicious meals. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all.
Well, I don't see any questions. So yeah, feel free to eat, guys. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Enjoy your meals and take care.
And it will be posted immediately on YouTube. If anyone wants to go back, or if you missed a step or joined us late, feel free to click that YouTube link.